welcome once again to Whispers in the Darkness, the paranormal podcast from the Out There Paranormal group. And whispering for you tonight, we have myself, Nigel, and...
myself, Juliet Smith.
We've got a guest.
We have indeed.
We've got a very interesting guest.
How
in fact.
Exciting!
Yes, we have in fact got a BAFTA award-winning British writer, broadcaster, and journalist, creator of 3 really rather excellent podcasts, and a play that has received some excellent reviews.
Any ideas who it is, folks?
Hey, guess who it is? If I say, I know who I saw, and say to you, bloody hell, Jules. It's only Danny Robbins. Hello, Danny. Nice of you to join us.
Hello. That's quite an intro.
Well, yeah. So, tell us a little bit about Danny Robbins to start with before we sort of dive into all the other bits and pieces, because I'm sure people are going to be interested in sort of hearing about you rather than just sort of all the other stuff that we're going to throw in, like regards to your podcasts and things like that. So, tell us about Danny.
Well, I live in Walthamstow in East London, and I have just put my children to bed right now, and so I'm talking to you in that kind of strange soporific state after reading to children in the dark. This is the kind of the unglamorous side behind my life. No, I mean, it's lovely, isn't it? I've been neglecting my children too much recently. I've been making 15 episodes of Uncanny, which has been this kind of relentless, intense labour of love, which has just kind of filled every waking moment, and to the mad extent where there was one day where I worked 19 hours, getting up at 9 a.m. and going to bed at 4 o'clock in the morning. So I mean, it is, it's a proper labour of love. So actually, just having paused now and having just finished the last Uncanny, it's been lovely to be back with the family. But yeah, I am somebody who is obsessed with ghosts, like yourselves. But I mean, my background is comedy actually, and I come from sort of quite a world away from the kind of the dark and the macabre, really. I mean, I spent a lot of my career, a lot of my years writing jokes for a succession of people, from Basil Brush to Joan Rivers to, Ronnie Barker at one point, and all sorts, Yeah.
Really interesting people.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I started really young. I got into comedy straight out of university. Even at university, actually, I was submitting stuff to radio and TV programs, and just kind of was lucky to get a break very early, and kind of, started writing. It's pretty much the only job I've ever done. Did a few kind of bar jobs, sort of in working in theatre bars when I first left university, but I've pretty much spent my entire adult life writing and performing, and I really enjoyed comedy, and I do love comedy still, but I reached a point where I felt a little bit of an end of the road with it. I felt a little bit dissatisfied with just being facetious and funny on a regular basis, and I wanted to do something more. And I think I was always very interested in exploring ghosts, and it comes from a place with me which I think really stems right back to childhood, where I was brought up in an atheist household by a mum who had been brought up Catholic, and so whenever I went to visit my grandparents, the house was surrounded by these images of belief, of popes and Jesus staring down at me in a very sort of slightly menacing way, holding his sacred heart, and lots of images that I was fascinated by but didn't quite understand, and I think I always felt like I was a little bit left out of something. I wanted to be part of a club, and wanted to be part of. I liked the idea of magic, and I liked the idea of there was something more out there, and I really love the idea that we don't just stop and that we don't just die, and that all of this amazing work that we put into being human beings, of living and loving and fathering and husbanding, and all the communication that we do, and building up these amazing networks of friends, and all the kind of things we do, whether it's building a table or writing a book or painting a picture, or just creating an amazing friend network, or just being good at your job, whatever you do that you do well, the idea that just ceases is horrible and hateful and unbearable. And so the idea that we could come back is, I think, what really, really makes me interested in ghosts. I think that's the little kind of the lamp that leads me into the darkness.
I mean, I got into it myself because I had an experience when I was a child of about 5 or 6 years old. I was brought up in an old farmhouse, and I at the time I just thought it was simply, just a person, and it was only until I was older in later life that I actually thought about it and realised what it was, and that's really what got me into it, and having these experiences that obviously as I got older I grew and became more aware, spiritually aware with it and things like that, and it's fascinated me ever since then. I've always been drawn to it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I think I live vicariously through people who have seen things or experienced things, because I have never ever had an experience that I would class as supernatural, and I do feel like I really would like to, and I found myself in situations like when we were recording Battersea Poltergeist, we went to 30 East Drive, which a lot of people will have heard of. It's this famous kind of paranormal tourist destination now where the Black Monk of Pontefract case happened. And I went and I was desperate for something to happen. I was like, oh, please, I'd love to see an object fly through the air or something.
Yeah.
And I felt nothing at all, really. And I would love it. But at the same time, I think be careful what you wish for. I was talking to Barry Dodds, who does the Parapod, who you might know.
Barry,
yeah. And so he was saying that he had never had an experience happen to him, but he was a believer. And then suddenly he had something happen to him in Edinburgh, I think it was, one summer when they were filming Parapod, and he had something happen to him that absolutely terrified the life out of him, to the point where he sort of ran out of the venue screaming and had to be calmed down by his team. And okay, so so you know all about it. But I mean, he says he wishes that he hadn't had that, and that he could go back. You can't go back. That's the thing. All of the people I've interviewed for Uncanny, you can't unpick that experience. No. It is life changing. It changes the way you see the world, and that may not be something that you want.
Yeah. Well, especially with some of the cases you were talking about as well, where that has really affected the people, and it's amazing to actually hear them come on and tell the stories like that. I mean, how do you decide which stories you're actually going to use? I mean, you must get like hundreds of them sent through to you.
Yeah,
I do. I mean, literally hundreds and hundreds, and sometimes it feels like almost hundreds a day. It's incredible. It's this non-stop deluge, but it's wonderful, and I love it. And we're trying really hard to get through all of them and reply to everybody. And we've got so many incredible stories coming in. I mean, certain stories set my pulse racing. The stories that give me a little shiver down the spine when I read it, then that's a really good indicator. But the ones that really excite me are the ones that begin, I don't believe in ghosts, but I've seen a ghost. Because I feel like, it's very easy to see a ghost if you want to. If you are somebody who believes passionately in ghosts and you go into an environment, that is rumoured to be haunted, a haunted castle or a haunted pub, whatever, you can see ghosts. Every shadow, every creak of the floorboards can be a ghost. If your mind is going in that direction, you kind of want it enough. But if you're somebody who's resolutely kind of bombastically skeptic, like Ken from Room 611, who's this eminent geneticist, this scientist, if you're someone like that who just is totally set up and hardwired to not believe in ghosts, and you see a ghost, I want to know about that. That's what excites me, because that's the point where you think, well, actually, if it can happen to that person, it can happen to anybody. Because if you're someone who's determinedly not going to believe in ghosts and you still see them, I mean, something is going on here. So those are the ones that would definitely head to the top of the pile, I think. And then, beyond that, I just, for me, I love to try and have a diversity of voices in the series. And I think, that's something we can work even harder at next series and hear, stories from different age groups, different backgrounds, different walks of life, different countries, and I'd like to push that more and more in the second series. And, we had that interesting story about Jinn, about the Muslim teenager who... the angel in the bathroom, I think it was case 7, which is really interesting, to hear from about ghosts from a different perspective. Jinn is something that people less familiar with.
Yeah, because theirs is so different, the way that the jinn work, isn't it? It's like, wow, but there's still that sort of thing that they're there, something completely different that can do the same sort of things as our own ghosts do, but the way they sort of describe them is completely different.
Well,
in a world of their own, aren't they? They have this own world that they live in.
And the fact that they can be both good and bad as well. And I think, like in Britain and America, we deal in very kind of binary good and evil, but I think there are other cultures where, like, I think I was talking to somebody yesterday about India and about how, the gods can be both good and bad. They have kind of the capacity for both within them, and it's less sort of clear cut. There is less of a kind of black and white. There's more of a grey area, So, I think that's interesting. I think Britain and America definitely have this kind of obsession with ghosts. Like my wife is Swedish, and I feel like they're not as interested in ghosts as us. They're kind of quite kind of rational, kind of pragmatic people. Yeah. I think we are so interested with ghosts because we are very, very bad at dealing with death. Like we're not like, some cultures have this wonderful kind of link with ancestors, and they kind of, the dead are with you at all times. You process death in a better way. We freak out about death. And so we need ghosts. Ghosts are this kind of comfort blanket, this kind of buffer zone between us and death.
Yeah, we thought about it like that. That's quite a good way of putting it. But we do. There is that stigma attached to people dying. It's really, really strange.
We're really. I mean, personally, I'm really frightened of death. I have times in my life I've had a really profound fear of death. So I think we hang on to ghosts because as frightening as they are, this is the paradox of ghosts. That as frightening as they are, they're also comforting.
Yeah, they are. Yeah. They really are, and it's quite interesting how. Ancient cultures as well, they all believe in spirit and ghosts, and yet these ancient cultures through civilizations have never actually met, thousands and thousands of years ago, and that absolutely fascinates me. And they all believe in a good, and they believe in an evil, and the good is up and the evil is down. And yet these cultures have never actually met. I mean, I find that really, really interesting going back.
When we look at the similarities between them, you're talking about, you sort of get Egyptians and the Aztecs and stuff like that. Their concepts are similar, but then again, they're miles apart. So
I mean,
it's always something with humanity, though, hasn't it? We have to have that sort of belief in something.
Well, it's really interesting, and I think you look at kind of ghost belief, and you think, well, you have all these similarities of reports from Roman times until now. The way that a poltergeist haunting is described in the same terms throughout history. Like I think we found. We talked about this in the Battersea Poltergeist live show, but I think we found like an account from sort of something like 850 AD from some German monks. And they described it in virtually identical terms to the way the Battersea Poltergeist haunting in the 1950s was described. And so you think, well, either there is something going on here, and people are describing it in the same way as you might describe a rainstorm. If you got 10 people to describe a rainstorm, they describe it in very similar terms. Or our brains are processing something in very similar terms. Either the thing exists, or it's just our brain's way of dealing with things. And that maybe ghost belief is very similar throughout the ages because all those people have needed to deal with death in the same way. I think you can look at this in very different ways depending on if you're coming at it from a believer's point of view or a skeptic point of view.
That's very, very true.
That's true. That's the one thing I really enjoyed about when you've done the Uncanny, especially the Uncanny podcast, is the fact that you've got people from both sides of the argument to actually talk. You've got a skeptic and you've got a believer as your experts, and they both come up with perfectly valid reasoning.
Absolutely.
And you're sitting there trying to make your mind up because you're thinking, I really believe in this. And all of a sudden they say, well, no, it could be this. Yeah, right. I mean,
You're team skeptic, though, aren't you?
I teeter on I teeter on the fence, unfortunately, because of experiences I've had myself that I can't sort of describe, makes me think, but there's other things I think, well, no, actually, I know what that is. I can describe, I give you a valid reason as to why that happened. But with yours, it's like, oh my God, 611 is a classic. I mean, I'm obsessed with that case.
Yeah. Me too. I mean, I sort of like to think of the experts as almost like like we're debating in the way that football pundits do after a football match. Kind of like with all the cases, I have this thing of you talk about in the present tense. It's like this has just happened to Ken. Like we just heard this thing happen. And like, what do you make of it, Kieran? What do you make of it, Evelyn, or whatever? And I love the energy of that, and sort of sitting around and debating it, and it kind of makes these cases feel really fresh and they come to life. But expert has become almost a dirty word recently. Like that kind of there's been that kind of disregard for experts, and I sort of feel like. We've kind of reclaimed that a bit in this show, and these people are proud to be experts, but they're kind of they're experts who you kind of totally get on board with, and I think like whoever the skeptic expert is represents all the skeptics, and the believer expert represents all the believers. I'm sort of in the middle with maybe like the majority of the audience. I think there's probably a lot of people out there who aren't sure what to believe. They're pulled in different directions. I'm the same. You maybe want to believe, but you're not quite sure if you can quite go the distance. And so I think it's fun. I love the fact that probably people are shouting at their iPhones or their radios or however they're listening and going, "Oh, Kieran, shut up! It's not infrasound." And Evelyn, I can't believe you're saying that. What do you think? Of course, poltergeists don't exist. And I think that's fun as long as it kind of keeps in that fun, respectful environment, which amazingly it seems to. I mean, that is the kind of quite unique thing about this show, that in this hugely polarized world that we live in, where we define ourselves as much by what we hate as what we love, somehow, even though people are completely opposite ends of the spectrum, believing in ghosts or not believing in ghosts, it doesn't get more polarized than that. And yet everyone gets on and enjoys it in their own way. And that's probably the thing that I am proudest of this whole thing, really, that with both Battersea and Uncanny, that we've kept that kindness. I think it's so important.
Yeah. And it's really refreshing to see. I mean, we've been working in paranormal circles for a number of years, and you see some of the infighting that goes on. It's horrendous.
Yeah.
Really awful. You don't see it so much on Twitter, but you do see it an awful lot on Facebook. But groups bickering with each other and arguing with each other, it's just crazy.
It's crackers because we're all looking for the same thing.
Exactly.
It's
you
crackers.
can't understand it, which is why I like this so much. The fact that all of a sudden we've got this little community where everybody's opinion is valid, and I've learned so much from this as well. We're listening, basically listening to the show, listening to what people have been saying. It's brilliant.
It's interesting for people like me as well that do have experiences, because I battle, because I love the science behind it. And I battle with my psychic side, and then I battle with the science side as well, because I'm very into the science and quantum theory and, parallel dimensions, all this kind of stuff. So when you put the two together, and you blend experiences and the science, it really does make you think a lot about it. And I love how Uncanny has kind of looked at both sides of the coin. I don't think that has really been done before.
No, I think that's nice. I mean, I think the idea of it making you think is great, because I think a lot of paranormal shows on TV don't, thinking is not required. It's, there's a starting point that ghosts exist and people are running around in night vision cameras and screaming and it's, I think, so the thing that I think is maybe different about Uncanny to a lot of paranormal shows is that it's not about places, it's about people. And so many paranormal shows are about, we go to a place and then we we hope that things will happen, and of course things have to happen because it's television and you need it to be exciting, I think Uncanny takes a starting point of somebody has had an experience and we want to try and understand and explore and talk about it and find out more about that experience. But if you go to Louis Belt, you will not have the same experience as Phil had. And if you go, if Room 611 still existed, some people might have the same experience as Ken, but many people wouldn't. And I think I read an interesting thing on Twitter. One of our another guy who tweets a lot, called James, who was talking about a poltergeist being like making a cake, and you need the right ingredients, certain people, a certain location, certain times of life, certain environmental things. And I think that's very true. And I think, that idea that everybody who turns up at a haunted castle would see a ghost is kind of crazy. And that's where you get into that kind of whole thing of having to fabricate stuff and making stuff up, and, a kind of psychic under pressure, kind of having to kind of, just basically make stuff up, to kind of keep the punters happy.
Absolutely.
So I'm intrigued by why people have these experiences. I think, you have listened to Uncanny, you've heard some of the genuinely strange, frightening, seemingly inexplicable experiences people have. And just, that's so intriguing. That's enough for me. I just love diving into that. And people keep saying, well, would you go to the location? Are you interested in going to the location? What about the people who live in the house now? And, I think those are all interesting questions. And with a bigger budget and more time, and, if we were doing it for television, whatever, then yes, I'd love to go to Louis Belt, and I'd love to go to those places. But I'm under no illusions that I would walk into that environment and suddenly see a ghost.
No.
Chances are you'd see absolutely nothing at all. That's the thing. Like you said, it is a case of time and place. You know, and you wonder to yourself whether or not the actual person themselves is some kind of trigger. Is it something in them that's actually triggered the experience?
Yeah, I think that's fascinating, and I think it's very clear that a lot of people have these experiences when they're at a certain point in their life. Teenagers, or even perhaps more so, that kind of period of just having left home, university. I've had so many cases sent to me about that kind of period of 19, 20, having just left home, being a student, and you're clearly at your most vulnerable there. You've just left home, you're away from all your support structures, you're trying to cope with life and forge a new life and maybe reinvent yourself and all those kind of things. And at the same time, you're incredibly open. You're like this amazing sponge soaking everything up. I mean, when I look back, I was digging out in the attic the other day and found some letters I'd written to a mate at that time of my life. And just, it's like looking at a different person. You're so so open and so curious about the world and so unjaded. And so absolutely. I mean, so if you are coming from a believer point of view, then maybe that makes you more open to these experiences and you can kind of receive these messages. And if you're a skeptic, then you would say, well, look, that's somebody who's kind of more prone to anxiety, more prone to imaginative flights of fancy. So, it's interesting. But having said that, I could give you many cases that are sent to me that are, somebody in their 40s or their 50s or their 60s or whenever, I think these things can happen to you at any moment in your life at any point.
Yeah.
So, Danny, the cases that you chose for Uncanny, were you actually surprised by the ones that got the most responses?
I was certainly surprised by the scale of the response. I felt that Ken's was a really good story, and I wondered about whether to lead with it, because on paper I was thinking like we had some other stories with like sort of maybe like Charlie Howard, the Brooklyn Poltergeist, where it was sort of like that felt a bit more glamorous. Maybe it was like New York, and she's young and she's funky and she's cool. And I was like, should we sort of, if you want to be an attention-grabbing podcast, you kind of go very young and funky and that sort of thing, And here was Ken, this very sensible middle-aged man. I was like, is a sensible middle-aged man going to be the thing that kind of brings in the mass audience? But I mean, my God, Ken is an interesting man, isn't he? And like, just what an incredible character, and what a genuinely brilliant storyteller. And so it just felt to me like he was absolutely the right person. And if it's a manifesto. Ken's story is a manifesto for Uncanny, because he is the classic brilliant, the best sort of indisputable world champion of being the I don't believe in ghosts but I saw a ghost kind of person. It doesn't get better than that. And actually, if you want to get into kind of ghost story tradition, if you look back at like the M.R. James stories, the classic Victorian ghost stories that Mark Gatiss now has a fine line in adapting for telly. Those all seem to hinge around an Oxford Don or some kind of academic or some sort of Eton scholar. So this bastion of credibility. So Ken is that, and but I could never in a million years have imagined it would take off in the way it did, and I ended up being on television in Ireland and on breakfast radio in Northern Ireland, and it was in the broadsheets in Northern Ireland, BBC website, and it went viral. It was huge, and it just utterly gripped everybody. And I think because it had so many kind of points of entry for people, like a lot of people remember being a student. If you haven't been a student, you still remember that time in your life when you were that age and how you felt at that time, and it just it was like a nightmare come to life. Like we've all probably had nightmares like that, but for it to come to life in that kind of 3D way, that figure in the room, it was it felt like a horror movie come to life, and it had everything, but the way that Ken described it was utterly plausible and utterly believable. And then 100%. As the story unfolded and more came out, I mean, who would have known we'd get witnesses like Gary Foster and Billy and all these people coming forward, offering layer upon layer of credibility, and suddenly you felt like you were in the midst of this incredible mystery story that was just, it was the case that kept on giving. And I feel like now, we could return to it in series 2, and I feel like we'd still have plenty to say about it.
Are you going to?
Oh, please say you are.
I think we probably will, because I think there's still so much coming in about it, and I've got a lot of bloody Hell Ken t-shirts to sell as well.
I was kind of hoping Mum is about to wear it tonight.
I was waiting, aren't we?
They should be on their way out soon, I think. Yeah.
Well, come on then, Danny, say it. What's the hashtag? Come on.
Hashtag bloody hell can.
Yay!
Who would have thought it? That's the thing that gets me. It's just that one moment you said that.
I know. And honestly, I mean, it was not in any way contrived. I mean, I thought long, and I was thinking about cutting that line. I was thinking, like, do we really need that line? We're desperately trying to get it down, like, because it goes out on Radio 4 as well. We have to hit this kind of set duration of 27 minutes 45 seconds. I think really specific. Which always I never like having to hit that. It feels a pain to have to hit that.
It's like pressure.
Yeah, but anyway, so like, I was having to get it down, editing it down, cutting bits and stuff. And I was like, do we really need that bloody hell can line? You don't need that, do you? But then I thought, I'll leave it in. And then suddenly, the day it's released, I see it just, my Twitter feed starts filling up with bloody hell can, bloody hell can, bloody hell can. I'm like, oh, okay, we might have started something here.
Well, I think it's a catchphrase for the whole thing.
I think I said this in the last episode, but it came to embody something. It came to embody this kind of almost kind of existential utterance of, like, just there are more things in heaven and earth. That it's surprise, it's fear, it's solidarity with Ken. It's all these kind of things. It became, an expression that whether you're a believer or a skeptic, it summed up how you felt about these cases. That they were breathtaking. And so we morphed to bloody hell Phil, and what do we have? Bloody hell Grant, and all those things. Bloody hell Patty. Every case this series had those moments. I think those bloody hell moments.
Yes, yeah, they all did, yeah. The thing I really liked about this one as well is the fact that you threw in a UFO as well with the Todmorden incident.
Yeah.
Because that was really, really refreshing to hear someone do that, because people think paranormal is just ghosts, but there's such a wide field.
Yeah.
And to hear you do the UFO story, I thought that's really fascinating.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the person, Rhiannon Roberts, who commissioned the show, who's kind of a very wise and good commissioner, suggested, she said, like, would you do UFOs as well? And I was initially kind of, in my head, I was a bit resistant. I was like, I love ghosts, and I think there's so much to talk about with ghosts. But actually, I'm really glad we did, because it's another really interesting front to open up. And whilst there are lots of similarities, I think, in terms of UFO experiences and ghost experiences, there's also some really, really big differences. I think, ghost experiences are so often in domestic settings, and UFOs are almost always not. They're almost always, driving down a road or somewhere very random. And ghost experiences often come from a build-up. There's a kind of, I don't feel good in this place. I feel uncomfortable. I start hearing noises. It builds. But UFO moments are normally kind of boom, just kind of, like it just comes from nowhere, like a sledgehammer blow. And I find that interesting. Those differences, but the way that we treat people who've had these experiences are very similar. The as a society as a whole, we're inclined to dismiss these experiences and not be very accepting of them. So for me, that instantly brings out the kind of, I think that's the wrong thing to do. I want to listen to these people and find out why they've had this and what's going on, and there's more to this. So it's interesting. But also we had like guardian angels, and we had premonitions, which took us into slightly different territory as well. I would love to do a cryptozoology story, and we had a few.
That's on my question.
Yeah, okay, well, sorry, but we had a few we were exploring. We had there was a few cases that we were thinking we might do, and then it didn't quite fit. It didn't quite work out. But I would like to think that in series 2 we will definitely do something about that. I think that's really interesting territory as well.
And what about as well, because this is something I'm interested in, is not many people cover underwater hauntings.
Yeah, okay.
And there's quite a few. Obviously the Titanic is known for hauntings. There's been various ghost ships and things like that. Hardly anybody has gone into the ocean, and undersea hauntings and strange occurrences undersea.
I think somebody asked a question once, do you have any stories about someone who's actually seen a ghost while they've been diving?
Yeah.
And we're like,
well, instantly you've got my attention there, and it sounds so interesting. I think exploring things like that. Clearly there's certain jobs that put you into extreme situations, like being a diver, being a fireman, being a soldier, And I imagine there's some really interesting paranormal stories that come out of those extreme things.
Oh, absolutely. And also, touching, you said, on cryptozoology as well, the Marinara Trench and, because we know more about our moon than we know about our ocean, don't we? That's a fact. So what is
hiding down there?
Yeah.
It's messy.
No, it's fascinating, isn't it? And we as a people, human beings, have a real fascination with that, the deep, don't we? And with ideas of sea monsters and giant squids, and I mean sharks. My kids are endlessly fascinated with sharks. The sharks are these incredible things that have been around for longer than the dinosaurs, haven't they? And there are sharks swimming around that are hundreds of years old. Those in themselves are feel almost supernatural.
But they're finding things all the time, aren't they?
Yeah,
I mean, it was only until the 1920s, 1930s, the coelacanths, the fish that they
fossil
thought was...
fish that gone, they found one.
And they discovered that.
Yeah.
That they only found... I mean, looking at cryptozoology, there's all these stories about Bigfoot. It was only fairly recently they discovered gorillas living in the mountains. And, I mean, they were discovered, 1930s, I think? It was as late as that, and for years they were like, no, don't be ridiculous. Big apes can't live in mountains. It was sort of unheard of, and yet they were discovered fairly, in history fairly recently. Yeah. So there's still so much we don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could say the impossible is only what we have not yet realised is possible. So I mean, it's a nice idea to think that maybe one day we will know what ghosts are, but then a little bit of me feels like it's nice to have the mystery, and I think it's quite nice to not know all the answers to everything in the world, isn't it?
Yeah, certainly, yeah.
So sliding very gently back to Uncanny, are you intending to make Uncanny into a stage show? Would you look at doing that?
I think that I would love to. I really, really enjoyed doing Battersea Poltergeist live. That was so much fun, and it was a really lovely way to connect with people who were part of the community as well. I think that Battersea Poltergeist started in this point in time where we couldn't meet each other and we couldn't be in groups together. It really was a product of lockdown. It was commissioned at the very beginning of the first lockdown, and then it came out in January of this year. Sorry, not this year, of 2021. And so it was just great to be out, in the autumn, to go out and see people and be in theatres with people, and what an amazing, brilliant feeling to be out. And I really enjoyed it, and it sort of felt like we were able to do something that was quite different to the podcast, and yet sort of felt in the spirit of the podcast. And so, I mean, I think Uncanny would be a lot of fun to do that, and it's certainly something that we've chatted about. So I think I hope that we will make that happen. Yeah.
So it's a watch this space then.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would love to get out and do it again. My background is in live performance. I used to do when I was 15 years old, I was doing stand-up comedy in pubs in Newcastle. That's kind of where that's where I come from, and and doing sort of the Edinburgh Festival every year. So I had, before I did the Battersea Poltergeist tour, I hadn't been on stage for 10 years, and I found it a bit daunting. It was a little bit like, oh God, can I still do this? But then as soon as I got out there, I was like, I remember this, and it just felt good. So
it all comes flooding back.
The muscle memory comes back. So that was a long-winded way of saying that, yes, I would like that to happen, yeah.
Brilliant, yeah. So how would you do it? That's the thing. I mean, you would sort of pick some of the stories to take with you. They're like Battersea Poltergeist, it is one story. With Uncanny, you've got so many to sort of try and tell.
Yeah.
So would you take a select view?
It would have to be Ken.
It would have to be Ken.
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd want to do some of the cases that people love and have a particular connection with, because people would love to hear those debated in more detail. But I mean, it might also be fun to have some newer cases as well. I think it's quite nice when you're doing that kind of thing to have entirely new content as a real reason for people to go to it. And so that's perfectly possible as well. And I don't know. I mean, I think another fun thing about the Battersea Poltergeist tour was having Kieran and Evelyn on stage with me, and going out and being in that little team, and just the debate between them on stage is quite fun. I think, and taking questions. I think the question and answer session was a really good fun part of it.
I don't think Evelyn takes any prisoners, does she?
No, she she's good. But, and Kieran can stand up to himself though as well. So
Yeah.
good. He's
I
no
got the
pushover.
impression that you actually like to wind him up a bit, don't you? With Kieran O'Keefe. Because when you did the Lou one, you were saying to me, it's not infrasound, is it, Kieran? And I thought, that's yes.
And I think, I love Kieran's explanations. I think Kieran is brilliant at coming up with fantastic skeptic explanations for things that are not what you'd expect. He's very clever at coming up with things that sort of feel, paranormal Poirot moments, I call them, like little things that kind of feel like they leap out the pages of a detective story, and he'll crack cases in a certain way. But then, absolutely, Evelyn is great at pushing back, and, other experts we've got as well will push back and sort of say, but hang on, and I think, one thing that I think that believers would see as a criticism of skeptics is that sometimes skeptics are prone to do a kind of one-size-fits-all explanation for things. They'll say, like, well, look, this sort of haunting is normally caused by infrasound or by sleep paralysis. And then you go, but look at this case, let's just really look at that one. They're like, well, but we weren't there, we can't comment on that one, but it's probably this. And you go, but look, but it doesn't quite fit this.
Might not be.
And so I think that's where you can have fun with this kind of thing, of kind of pushing back and kind of going, but actually that is a very plausible explanation. But it doesn't answer this and this and that and this, And I think Peter Laws talked about it being like a game of whack-a-mole, where you're sort of, as soon as you skeptically knock down one thing, another, potentially supernatural thing pops up, and it keeps popping up, and you can't ever quite nail everything in a satisfyingly skeptic way.
That's so
How do you
true.
decide on which experts to actually use then? Because you've used quite a few across the series. I mean, we knew quite a few of the names, just obviously moving the circles that we move in, but there's some new people there we've not heard of before, which is really quite interesting.
Oh, okay, yeah. I mean, it's I don't know, it's a mixture. I mean, I've worked with a few of the people before, and then other people are kind of interesting people who came across my path. I mean, clearly, like, Chris French is a really respected skeptic, and so is Deborah Hyde. I mean, Hayley Stevens is someone I've always found really interesting. She did my Haunted podcast with me, and she's, somebody who's kind of different to a lot of the other skeptics out there. I think she comes from a kind of younger point of view, and she's kind of...
she was a paranormal investigator before she was a skeptic, so she's
which is a really interesting background, that she was a believer turned skeptic, sort of... poacher turned gamekeeper. I mean, I think that's really interesting point of view to come from. Reverend Peter Laws, obviously he's got an interesting point of view of coming from a religious point of view. Kate Botley came in from that same point of view and was great. So I think it's an interesting mix. I mean, I think there's been quite a few people offering themselves to me as skeptics who I sort of feel are maybe the sort of people who might crop up on a kind of standard paranormal show, and that's not to sort of denigrate them or those shows, but I sort of feel I kind of like to kind of dig out people who are maybe a little bit more unusual, maybe people who don't get that airspace somewhere else, or just kind of have slightly different perspectives, and certain people are really right for different cases. I mean, clearly, like David Clark was, he is the UFO expert par excellence, so he was absolutely perfect for Todmorden. He knows that case inside out. So I don't know. I mean, I'm always completely open-minded. I'm always kind of keen to find new people, but you start to kind of build a little team that you trust, and I think then it's kind of nice for listeners to have that sense of a team and hearing people coming back again and again, and it becomes a little kind of family.
And because you've had that accessibility with them on Twitter as well, where they're quite happy to join in the conversations and put things in and give you feedback on what's been said. It's really, really nice to be able to sort of access people like that you probably wouldn't normally have the chance to do.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think not just the experts, but some of the witnesses as well. Like Ken joined Twitter especially, so did Phil. Patty made herself available, and Charlie Howard, and Hannah Betts, all these people. And I just think that's really unusual, full stop, and not just in paranormal shows, just in anything, in a documentary, that the people in the documentary make themselves available and answer your questions on social media immediately after you've heard it, like particularly like in the listen along things, even arguably as you're listening to it, I think that's lovely, and it's we live in a very interactive world. We do have access to famous people in a way that we didn't before. You can send messages to whoever you like, and there's a chance they might reply. So I like the fact that we've created a thing where the people in the program can leap out and talk to you and contact you and help you if you need. I mean, I noticed there was a thing recently where Deborah Hyde and maybe one or two of the other skeptic experts were kind of giving advice on something to somebody, I think about, I don't know if it was to do with sleep paralysis or some sort of something like that, some troubled nightmares or, something like that, but night terrors maybe. But, it's really interesting. And I always think like skeptics are incredibly useful if you are scared of something and you don't need to be. If you think your house is haunted and it's actually not haunted and it's to do with your boiler making funny noises or, the floorboards contracting or whatever, if it can be explained away and that eases your fear, then that is a brilliant thing. That's a really great use of skepticism. Skepticism for me is less. I mean, the negative side of skepticism, I guess, is where you try to poo-poo the experience of somebody that somebody's had this profound experience. Possibly, like for instance, we made an episode of Haunted, which was all about people like grief ghosts, people who'd lost people lost people close to them, parents or lovers. The last thing you want to do to those people is explain those away, because it's incredibly important for them. It's bringing intense comfort, and maybe it's a real ghost. Even if it's not, it's bringing incredible comfort. It's an important thing in their life, and so you don't want to just pour cold water on that and sort of try and explain it away. So I think skepticism has to be kind and respectful, and it can absolutely be brilliant and useful at times, and then there can sometimes be a kind of less kind and less respectful brand of it. But I think I feel like the skeptics that we have brought in for our show are incredibly open-minded, and all of these people, and Chris French definitely says this, Deborah as well, they all say I could be wrong. I could be wrong. They're not coming from this kind of point of view of a kind of arrogance of I am right, listen to me. They're saying this is what I believe, and this is my belief based on years and years and years of studying this. But I could be wrong, and they remain open-minded, and that I think and Hayley's like that as well. I think skepticism is about keeping an open mind.
You have to, you got to question it. You can't just sort of blankly say, like you said, no. As far as I'm concerned, this is what I know. This is my opinion. That's what it is, and I'm sorry, but I'm right. You have to keep that open mind. I mean, when we do stuff, we question everything. You have an experience, like you said, it can easily be like when we have someone with a house, for instance, and that's like you were saying. Something's happened, we hear this funny noise. We say to them, keep yourself a ghost diary, keep a note of what's happening, the times that it happens, what it actually is. Then what you can see then is you can see patterns emerging, like you were saying about, it could be the floorboards, it could be the central heating, it could be something simple.
Most of the time it is.
Most of the time it is, But then again, when you tell them that it's your central heating, or it's they don't want it to be the central heating. Quite a few people actually want.
This is the thing, and it's I mean. Ghosts can be the easy answer to a difficult question. Often the skeptical explanation is quite boring and quite complicated sometimes. I mean, some of the explanations that I've heard for cases, like you're going to go like, God, that is really bizarre and hard to get your head around, but that is a real, that is the scientific explanation, and it makes sense and it's proven, and that is real. So actually, ghosts is way more exciting. It's. And you can see why we all want to believe in it, because it's way more exciting to think that this is the ghost of somebody who was murdered on this site coming back than to think that it's to do with your boiler.
Not quite the same.
So absolutely, you can we all want the magic, don't we? And
I was just going to say that,
But I think there are enough cases out there that cannot be explained, and that's why I keep doing this. That's what makes me get up in the morning. That's what makes me excited about making another series. Those cases. I mean, I'm not looking at cases that I feel you can easily explain. If the skeptic could just come in and offer an easy explanation for it, then I wouldn't make the program.
No, it defeats the object, doesn't it? The idea is to make it that excitement where you are sitting there thinking, oh my God, Right. You actually got Kieran O'Keefe to say with Room 611 that he wasn't sure, and I don't think I've heard him say that ever
No,
about
Really?
ghosts.
I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
really interesting to hear him say it.
The angel in the bathroom pushed him quite close as well, I think. But
Yeah.
you know, Kieran's very interesting because he's somebody who loves the idea of ghosts. You know, he's somebody who grew up obsessed with ghosts as well. And you know, I think you know he enjoys the excitement of it all. You know, I think you know he'd love it if ghosts exist. You know, he doesn't believe in ghosts at all, but I think he'd love it if they did exist. And I think that's quite a healthy thing, really. That combination of
absolutely.
rationality and grounding, and also the excitement of it all. You know.
Yeah.
So you've done a lot of TV, you've done a lot of radio. What's your favourite? What do you prefer, and why do you prefer it?
I don't know really. I mean, I like telling stories, and I think different stories suit different mediums. You know, and
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed writing my play 222 and seeing the response to that. And you know, there are few things as moving and wonderful and exciting than sitting in a room full of people watching your play and watching them enjoy it. You know, that's been just amazing. And you know, I'm excited now to try and do something for television that kind of takes on the subject matter I've been looking at, and you know, this way of telling stories. I would like to do that. That's a kind of ambition. You know, and
I tell you what would be
Like
good
that, yeah.
do you remember the old Tales of the Unexpected?
oh yeah.
These Tales of the Unexpected.
We could have Danny's Uncanny of the Unexpected or something. And or wouldn't that be fab?
Although some of those tales are really twisted, though, weren't they? So,
Well, yeah,
then
but
again-
that'd be really good. I would love something like that.
No, it's true. But you know what? I've got to say, like during the lockdown, I absolutely counted my blessings that I was working audio, because whilst I looked around and saw my friends who were involved in like theatre or TV or whatever sitting twiddling their thumbs, we were able to make these programs. You know, and we made these things remotely. You know, we you know, like it was mad. Like, you know, Daphne Keane, who recorded, you know, who played young Shirley in Battersea Poltergeist, she was in Spain. We were recording her in Spain, you know, and the other actors in a studio in London. But it feels like they're all in the same room, and that's the beauty of, you know, we're talking to each other remotely now. You're in Norfolk and I'm in Walthamstow, and you know, we're doing that, and it feels like we're in the same room. And you can do that with audio, and
That's right.
and audio is brilliantly suited to the spooky. It does you do have a different relationship with it to television, and you know, in television you have a broader palette of scares available to you. You know, it's not just about noises.
Yeah.
You know, you can scare people in different ways, and I'm very excited about tapping into that. But I think audio is this wonderful intimate relationship, and I think you know, I think people have built this relationship with the shows that I make because of the moment we're in as well. I feel like lockdown, you know, we all wanted entertainment. We were craving that kind of thing. We loved the idea. And as much as people complained about, oh, why can't you release them all in one bingeable box set? You know, I think people did ultimately enjoy the thing of waiting a week and the build up, the excitement, the anticipation, spending a week researching the case and then getting the next hit. And it's been a moment. And I think also we're living through this moment of chaos and uncertainty and sadly death, you know, and so we're interested in ghosts, we're interested in the paranormal, and all those things have conspired to make people interested in my shows. And I think you build a relationship with it, and it's in your ears. You know, I'm your friend in your ears talking to you about ghosts, and the soundscape helps, and you know, and so audio is a lovely thing to play with. I really enjoy the possibilities of it, and I can't see a point in my life where I'd ever say I don't want to do audio anymore. You know, I think it's a powerful thing, and you know, we all love those podcasts that get us excited, the podcasts that make the washing up pleasurable, or make you want to jog that little bit longer, or make you want to not get off the tube at your stop for work or whatever. You know, the ones that make you want to keep listening.
Yeah,
Uncanny.
Yeah,
definitely. So, before we sort of wind up, just to say to you, is there any sort of timeline on the next series? Could you give us a sort of rough idea as to when we're going to be sort of...
I can't give you any specifics at all, but I mean, I think the plan is that the next project will be this other case like Battersea. We've found this case that we feel is interesting and deep enough to support a multi-part investigation, like kind of eight episodes again, like with Battersea, and we'd tell it through a mixture of drama and documentary again. That was a format that worked really, really well, I think, and really connected with people. And the drama was this brilliant way of bringing the case to life, and kind of almost like creating your own archive, if you like. That you get to hear the people this happened to. Because that's the one thing, like, hauntings, you don't have the video of it, particularly in the 1950s with Shirley, we don't have all this little neat thing. We can't hear those moments. We can read the descriptions of things, but then using that drama was a way of bringing that to life and evoking it. So I think that will be the next project that we will do. And then we'll do an Uncanny after that. So and who knows, we might drop in the odd bonus episode. We might do the scope to do bonus episodes of any of these series, really. And, we've got some amazing new Uncanny stories that we could drop in as a bonus episode. So I think, there are no rules. That's the nice thing. It's a podcast. We can drop stuff into the feed whenever we want. So, I mean, all I can say is there will be more, if you like ghosts, you will be served, don't worry. There will be things coming your way in the not too distant future. But I also think, though, that it is important to step away for a little bit, because I think, I don't want to become part of the furniture. I mean, I think Uncanny's exciting for you because it's, this kind of amazing, exciting run of cases. But I think if I was there every single week, I think you would get tired of me. I think, I would become, I don't know. I don't think it would be as exciting as if we take a gap and come back with more stuff. No, that's my personal opinion.
No, I agree with that. Yeah, you could slightly coin a phrase, you could kick the arse out of it quite easily.
Yeah, totally. And maybe I would get bored of it as well. Like if I was doing it relentlessly every week, I think it would become formulaic. And I think to step back, to kind of go, well, look, what worked well about the first series? What do we feel we could do better? What kind of stories didn't we cover? What kind of areas do we want to go into? And and we've got some absolute crackers already lined up, things that we came to us kind of late in the series, and we're like, this is such a great story, but we're going to save this now, we're going to hold on to it. So I'm excited about the next generation of stories to tell.
So are we.
Yeah, just a bit.
We can't wait.
Yeah. Danny, thank you ever so much for taking the time to talk to us tonight.
My pleasure.
Just want to say, if you're interested in any of Danny's podcasts at all, the BBC Sounds has got the Battersea Poltergeist and Uncanny, and the other series you spoke about, Haunted, you can find on any of your podcasting services. I know it's on Spotify, I know it's on Apple Podcasts, and I think it was Panoply, wasn't it? I think you did it.
I did it for Panoply. Yeah, they sort of went bust after a while, which is why we didn't make a second series. It's this kind of, it's funny. Like I made Haunted in 2017, and it was such a labour of love, like all these other ones, and it got such a nice response. It wasn't Panoply didn't particularly promote it very well, so it didn't have the kind of backing of the BBC, but it became a kind of cult kind of hit, and so many people said, I used to keep getting these messages from people saying, like, when are you doing second series? When are you doing second series? And the truth was, we just got, we signed this rubbish contract with Panoply where they sort of owned the IP to it, and I couldn't, and then they went bust, and I couldn't make another series. And so then making Battersea and making Uncanny, that was me kind of getting to make the show that I'd been frustrated from not being able to make for the last couple of years, and
yours, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's nice that people are going back and finding Haunted again, and I'm very proud of Haunted, and I think it's a great set of stories, and I feel like I personally feel like I kind of improved as a storyteller or a broadcaster since then. I am probably happier with Battersea or Uncanny now, but I'm still incredibly proud of Haunted, and I think all of those episodes stand up really, really well, and I'm loving the fact that people are going back and enjoying it. And it was in the charts again the other day, which was nice, which means that it really is getting listened to. So it's nice, and I feel like it's a sort of progression. It's lovely to feel like you're like a band making albums or whatever, and you're kind of, I feel like I'm learning each time. I'm learning about how to make these shows, but I'm also learning about the audience and what you like, and we're building this little nice thing together, this community together, and that's the beautiful thing. And going into another series of Uncanny, the audience is so important. You will be sending me stuff. Most of the stories will have come out of people who listened to the first series sending me their stories. So it's just I said it before, but that for me is the proudest thing of all. That kind of that we are Uncanny, that Uncanny community moment. I just I love that. And then that's that's what makes me smile when I lie in bed at night. It's nice.
Yeah, we'll keep it going for you while you're sort of
keep the home fires burning. I know you're going to try and do an Uncanny community Zoom, aren't you? That's great. I love that.
We are next week, and we're going to come back and try and interview some of your experts that you had as well, so we can sort of meet the experts sort of touch and throw that in as well.
Okay, well, just make sure I get 15% of anything you paid them. Yeah. All right.
Thank you very much, Danny.
A pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Take care.